Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia must be forced into genuine peace negotiations. The Kremlin says not yet. Swedish Prime Minister arrives in Turkey to discuss NATO membership with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And there's tension in Italy over Ukraine aid as defense minister and opposition leader feud publicly over sending more weapons to Kiev. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia must be forced into genuine peace negotiations. Speaking at the opening of COP27, the global climate conference underway in Egypt, Mr. Zelensky says, quote, anyone who seriously considers the climate agenda must also seriously consider the need to immediately stop Russian aggression, restore our territorial integrity, and force Russia to engage in genuine peace negotiations. He adds that Russia had repeatedly shown itself unwilling to engage in such negotiations. The kind of negotiations that we have repeatedly suggested and to which we have always received crazy Russian responses with new terrorist attacks, shelling, or blackmail is not what we want. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Russia is, quote, open to negotiation with Ukraine, but that the moment is not right for such talks. The Kremlin says, quote, we have repeatedly said that the Russian side remains open to achieving its goals through negotiations. We also repeatedly drew the attention of everyone that at the moment we do not see such an opportunity because Kiev has turned into a law their decision not to continue any negotiations. The Ukrainian leader had signed a decree in early October formally ruling out the possibility of negotiations with Russian President Vladimir Putin in response to Russia's claim to annex portions of 4 Ukrainian regions. Russia is open to negotiations with Ukraine, but the moment is not right for such talks. And yet, still staying with the president of Ukraine, he says the Donetsk region in the east remains the epicenter of fighting in the conflict, with hundreds being killed every day. Citing the use of missiles, aviation, and multiple launch rocket systems, Mr. Zelensky said more than 50 settlements across Ukraine had been hit on Monday, including at Zaporizhia and the Kherson region to the country's east. He also added that the Ukrainian forces are still in a state of active defense, but are gradually pushing Russian troops back.
The Donetsk region remains the epicenter of the greatest madness of the occupiers. Hundreds die daily. The ground before the Ukrainian position is littered with bodies of the occupiers. The occupiers hit more than 50 settlements in our country: Donbas, Zaporizhia, Kherson region, and others. Missiles, aviation, multiple launch rocket systems. In general, at the front, our forces are in state of active defense. In some areas of the east and south, we are gradually pushing back the enemy. Step by step, we are moving forward.
And U.S. Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Russia flouted international principles by its invasion of Ukraine. He was speaking in a televised interview where he was asked about the communication between the two countries. Mr. Sullivan said the U.S. is in contact with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. He had traveled to Kiev on Friday, where he met the Ukrainian leader and the country's government chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, and announced additional aid for Ukraine.
Joining us. We will continue to work day in and day out to support the brave Ukrainian people as they seek to defend their sovereignty and redeem their territorial integrity. And we will work day in and day out to continue to impose costs on Russia for as long as it is operating in a way that is way outside the bounds of the basic international rules of the road that not just everyone else signed up to, but that Russia itself signed up to. And those principles are not principles we invented. They're principles that every country in the world, including Russia signed up to in the United Nations Charter. The respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, that you cannot conquer and seize and quote unquote annex your partner's territory by force, that you cannot go purchase drones from Iran and crash them into homes and civilian power generation facilities to try to terrorize a population. Basic principles that Russia has completely flouted, to the cost, the great human cost of the people of Ukraine, and to the cost of stability and security far beyond Ukraine in Europe.
Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has arrived in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, to discuss the Nordic countries' bid to join NATO with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. Sweden and Finland launched their bids to join NATO in May in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but ran into objections from Turkey, which accuses the two Nordic countries of harboring what it says are militants from the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and other groups. Stockholm and Helsinki deny harboring such terrorists, but have pledged to cooperate with Ankara to fully address its security concerns and to lift arms embargoes. Yet Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said as recently as October the 6th that its demands had not yet been met. Turkey has said its parliament will not approve Sweden and Finland's NATO bids if they do not extradite peoples Ankara deems terrorists, namely the Kurdish militants and those accused of involvement in a 2016 coup attempt. In a letter purportedly sent from the front lines to a regional governor in Russia, men of the 155th Brigade of the Russian Pacific Fleet Marines say they were thrown into an incomprehensible battle in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. The letter, published by a prominent Russian military blog, was sent to the governor of Primorsky Krai. Russia's chief of staff, that's general staff, says, quote, "Once again we were thrown into an incomprehensible battle by General Muradov and his brother-in-law, his countryman Akhmedov, so that Muradov could earn bonuses to make him look good in the eyes of Gerasimov." The letter said, as a result of the carefully planned offensive by the great commanders, we lost about 300 men, dead and wounded, with some MIA over the past 4 days. We lost 50% of our equipment, that's our brigade alone. The district command, together with Akhmedov, are hiding these facts and skewing the official casualty statistics for fear of being held accountable. None of this fact contained in this letter has been verified from the Russian government. Italy's government and opposition have traded barbs over weapons shipments for Kiev after a massive demonstration in Rome over the weekend called for peace and diplomacy in Ukraine instead. After Defense Minister Guido Crosetto called him a neighborhood bully, former Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said that shirking from political debate on Ukraine aid would be bullying democracy itself. Mr. Conte, who leads the Five Star Movement, addressed tens of thousands of Italians who rallied against the war, telling them the new government's approach is, quote, leading only to escalation. Now that Ukraine is fully armed, Italy needs to push for a ceasefire and peace talks. That's according to Mr. Conte. But Mr. Crosetto, who is one of the founders of the ruling Brothers of Italy party and holds the defense portfolio in Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's government, attacked Mr. Conte on the pages of the newspaper Corriere della Sera over the weekend, calling his remarks at the demonstration meddling like a neighborhood bully who did not respect the institutions of state. Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Kremlin-linked oligarch known as Vladimir Putin's chef, appeared to admit to Russian interference in U.S. elections in a Telegram post yesterday. Mr. Prigozhin said that Russia has interfered, is interfering, and will continue to interfere in the U.S. democratic process in response to a journalist's question about Russia potentially meddling in U.S. congressional elections today. Mr. Prigozhin has no post in the Russian government, but his statements appear to be the first admission of a high-level Russian campaign to interfere in U.S. elections from someone close to the Kremlin. Mr. Prigozhin is reportedly one of Mr. Putin's most trusted confidants, so close that the Russian press dubbed him the chef to the Russian president after he began catering events for the Kremlin. Mr. Prigozhin subsequently won lucrative catering contracts for schools and Russia's armed forces, and by 2010 he was Kremlin insider with a growing commercial empire. All right, we have been talking about the U.S. midterm elections. Well, today is D-Day, in the sense that today is the last day of voting for U.S. midterm elections, and so we want to take a look at that and how all of it is related to this war in Ukraine and energy prices and all of that. We're being joined by Mr. Adetomiwa Adetilewa, Senior Enterprise Q&A at Medata US. He joins us virtually from Chicago. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm fine as well.
Good. Let me begin, of course, let me put it on the record, of course. You are a registered Republican. So perhaps the first question I should ask is, how do you see this, how have you seen this campaign? Yesterday, we saw everybody out. Donald Trump was out. President Joe Biden was out. Former President Bill Clinton was out. Former President Obama, Mrs. Clinton, everybody, all the big guns in U.S. politics were out yesterday. What have you made of the campaign so far? Do you think, as everybody is predicting, the Republicans will take one or both houses of Congress?
Sure. Republican is going to take at least one of the two chambers of Congress. And by what you said, you can see that everybody is not leaving any stone unturned. And the reason for that is because this election is very, very important. In fact, it is the most important election in current U.S. history. So that is why you see all the living former presidents, except Bush and Jimmy Carter, out there campaigning. You see their wife, you see the wife of the president. Everybody's out there campaigning because it is a very, very consequential election.
Now, part of what has made it quite controversial is the fact that your party, that is the Republican Party, seems to have, and I want you to confirm if that is indeed the case, seems to have indicated that if it wins, as you said, one, if not both, chambers of the U.S. Congress, it's not going to write, and I'm now quoting what the Republican in question said, is not going to write a blank check for Ukraine aid and all of that because the U.S., should come first, and that there isn't that kind of money to splash on Ukraine in their view. That has gotten quite a lot of people, your international partners, worried, that is the U.S. international partners. And that is coming just as the man we see in the picture, former President Donald Trump, is preparing, as we are told, to announce his own candidacy for 2024. And in all probability, he will toe this line because, of course, he came up with America First in this election history circle. What do you make of all of this? Is it true that Ukraine aid is going to be dialed back if the Republicans win?
Oh, yeah, it is true that some wing in the party don't want to give Ukraine blank check, just like you quoted. We have a broad sense in the Republican Party, but there is a part of it that people call the MAGA Republican, okay? And the MAGA Republican are like the staunch supporter of the president, our former president, President Trump. And they say there's not going to be blank check for Ukraine. And there's a reason for that many people don't want to talk about. If you remember, the first impeachment of Trump was all about Ukraine. It was about the call he had with President Zelensky. So you don't just think these people will come back to power with the power of the purse, which is in charge of our U.S. Congress, and then just forget what happened. They're not going to forget what happened. So I think some extremists, like the extreme right of the party, like Representative Majority Taylor Greene, we want to know what happened. They want to know where the money is going. So there's going to be more oversight on what they are spending on Ukraine and how they are spending it, and that will really, really play a major part in the conflict going forward.
You are a professional, and you know quite a lot about energy, and that's part of the reason why I found it quite interesting to be able to speak to you, alongside the fact that you are in the Republican Party, which means that you're also actively engaged in U.S. politics. Now, the energy prices have been one of the issues that have tended to play into the economic crisis, because when this Russian invasion of Ukraine started, the prices went way up the U.S. citizens were bearing the brunt of that. But we have since learned that the prices have started coming down. They've been coming down for quite a bit. Why do you think that is the case? Because those of us outside looking into the U.S. Also know that approval was given for the release of some of the barrels in the strategic reserve to be sold to some of the countries that had difficulty and all of that. But then the U.S. itself tended to offer a case study in economic difficulty. Interest rates were raised by the Fed only a couple of days ago, you know, to 14-year highs. Explain that to us.
Okay, so this is what is going to happen. So if Republicans take over the House or both House and the Senate, that will make Biden a lame duck president, meaning he can't govern by his own agenda anymore. He will need to do what is called concession in lawmaking. So for him to pass any bill, he will have to give Republicans some concession. So in the process of that, Republicans are going to demand for what their base wants. So in this case, Republicans will be like, okay, if you want the debt ceiling raised, then you have to take out the moratorium you put on drilling on all federal land. So that will anchor Biden's hand to make sure he lets them drill more. So they will demand for things like all those ESG or bank or financial institution not sponsoring or financing energy production. All those will have to be lifted. So in this case, it's no open check for Biden like it used to be when his party controlled both chamber of Congress. So if the Republicans are in and Biden has to make concessions on, you know, things like debt ceiling or keeping the government funded, Republicans will definitely ask for things that will ease energy production. And with Senator Joe Manchin on their side on energy production, so it's definitely going to put Biden's hand in a position where he will have nothing to do but to negotiate. And that will definitely bring down the oil price.
Now, the cloud that is looming over this midterm elections, possibly in a way that it doesn't loom over most elections, is the 2024 race. Biden is not on the ticket. Someone was pointing that out. One of the journalists who was analyzing it is that we're seeing so much of Biden and Trump, but they're actually not on the ticket. They're not contesting in this election. But you might be forgiven if you thought that they were. Everyone expects that Donald Trump is going to announce that he's going to contest in 2024 in a couple of days. I guess he just wants to wait to see what the results of the midterms are. And then, of course, Joe Biden has indicated, he had indicated before that, of course, he would contest for a second term. Now, both of these men are in their 70s and 80s. Do you think that, you know, at the level of U.S. politics, and you being an engaged political activist yourself, do you think this is having an impact on this election in the U.S.? I mean, these two gentlemen who contested in 2020, and we all know what the results were, it's looking like they will be contesting again in 2024.
Yeah, definitely. Biden is definitely on the election, and I'll tell you why. This election is a referendum on the party in the White House. And who is the man in the White House? That is President Joe Biden. So definitely Biden is on the ballot because everything the Republicans are talking about, like the economy, the crime, they are all derivative of Biden policy. So Biden policy is on the ballot. For Trump, the Republicans, technically Trump inserted himself on the ballot because there are many questions about his previous election that he wants the House and the Senate to look into, right? So you see committees about January 6th, you know, looking about what happened during 2020 election. Those things are on the ballot for Trump. And Trump feel that until Republicans have the power of the subpoena, that is meaning they are in charge of those chamber of Congress, then that is when his side of the story can be told. That is when the people on his side can actually have the power to question what actually happened during January 6th, what happened in some places during 2020 election. So technically, Trump felt he's on the ballot because he wants those things investigated. But with Democrats in charge of the House and the Senate, they will never investigate those things the way Trump wanted it. On the Biden side, his policies are on the ballot. Republicans contesting this election is attaching the candidate to Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi. Now, another thing that makes them vote to be on the ballot is about 2024 election. So here in the United States, the Secretary of State conducts elections. So we don't have a big, broad INEC like in Nigeria. So each of those Secretary of State, most of them are being contested for right now. So if you want to win in 2024, you want to make sure your party is the one in charge of the election right now. So you have purple states, which is the battleground state, like Arizona, Secretary of State, on the ballot. You have Pennsylvania gubernatorial position being on the ballot. You have Wisconsin gubernatorial election being on the ballot. You have gubernatorial and Secretary of State election in Georgia on the ballot. And those states are the states that determines which party wins the election because they are the swing states. So Democrats already have their blue state logged in. Republicans have their red state logged in. So these battleground states, they want to make sure that it is their person that is going to be in charge of the election next year, so in 2024. So that is why everybody is out, because whatever happened today, this election will technically tell you where 2024 election is going to go.
Indeed, and of course, we will be coming back to you as the results come in, and it becomes clear if, as you've predicted, the Republicans take over one, if not both, houses of Congress, and what that means and what the agenda will be going forward. Mr. Adetomiwa Adetilewa, thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning.
Thank you so much, sir.
After the break, Ukraine confirms takeover of shares in 5 strategic companies under wartime laws. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. 2 senior Ukrainian security and defense officials have confirmed that the shares of 5 strategic companies have been taken over by the Defense Ministry under wartime laws. The decision was taken at a top security meeting on November the 5th and came into force the following day, according to Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov. He declined to comment on which other companies' shares could be taken over. The move by the National Commission for Securities and the stock market was taken on the grounds of martial law, according to Yaroslav Zeleznak, the first deputy chairman of the Parliament's Finance, Tax and Customs Policy Committee. He published a text of what he said was a document by the Commission which indicated the companies, including engine maker Motorsich, energy companies Uknafta and Utatnafta, vehicle maker Atovkraz, and transformer maker Zaporets Transformata. The authenticity of the document could not immediately be confirmed. The Commission said it was not ready to comment. 3 of the companies could not be immediately reached. The other 2 declined comments. The companies are partially owned by the state and have links to prominent businessmen Ihor Kolomsky, Vyacheslav Borislev, and Konstantin Zhevago. Martial law was introduced in February when Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams. Laddie, morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. $3 billion in Bitcoin seized by the U.S. Justice Department.
Yeah.
Do we know why and how this is playing out?
Yeah, this is the second biggest seizure, by the U.S. And it's illegal money, obviously. It's Bitcoins that were stolen about 10 years ago. And at the time, the Bitcoin was stolen, it wasn't around this price. Bitcoins were about, I'm sure, less than
maybe $400, $300.
Way less than that, but below $100. And obviously, at that time, 50,000 Bitcoins wasn't that much. But right now, 50,000 Bitcoins at the current price, 19,000, we're talking billions.
A lot of money,
and, he was a famous hacker. That's John Zong, James Zong. He was a famous hacker. He hacked, the dark web. They have these forums where they sell drugs and, illegal products. So the platform had some vulnerabilities, that time, and he was able to take advantage of it and wiped out about 50,000, Bitcoins then. So you've seen the Department of Justice there. They've been tracking him for the longest time. They finally, caught up to him. And the good thing about, the blockchain is you can see these transactions on the ledger. It's open for everyone.
It's open and
to
nobody
see.
can control it
You can't
or
control
attempt to
it. You
conceal
can't
it.
erase it. You can't, edit, the transaction. So it's able to help, authorities actually trace where the funds, are being moved to. So imagine carrying about $3-point-something billion in a flash drive. So when they actually display, the seizures, all you see is just a flash drive on a table,
Yeah, you don't actually see an army of currencies on the table.
If you were dealing with fiat. So it's a big seizure. It's the second largest seizure. The first one was Bitfinex Exchange that was hacked a while back, and that was about $3.6 billion. They've been able to get that back too. So these are the pros, of the blockchain there. It's easy to trace some of these,
these transactions, particularly the illegal ones.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move quickly to China, where its exports to Russia, no surprises.
No surprises.
Those following that would say,
no surprises.
Have grown faster in spite of weakening demand elsewhere.
Yeah, because we're seeing, weakening demand in other parts, the countries that normally, import from China. We've even seen Apple. They've been having issues because of the zero COVID policy there, getting their phones.
Yeah, getting the phones out.
Out. So at the end of the day, we're still seeing, trade with Russia rising. Obviously, Russia doesn't have much, options, right now with the unfriendly nations mounting. So we're seeing more trade with Iran, more trade with China, more trade with India to the friendly nations. So Russia obviously is gathering more, more friendly nations, trying to make, trade between these countries easier, less hurdles. So they're doing, all they can to make sure that they get, the much needed imports, because at the end of the day, these sanctions are biting hard. They're not able to get, technology, that they need for their production in Russia. So we see them making moves with friendly nations, getting more friendly nations in there so that they can get the much needed imports. That's talking about Russia, but it's not easy.
Now, on the other hand, Ukraine's grain exports are down more than 30%.
No surprises there too.
Yeah, no surprises. I mean, because for the first half of the year, or even more, they couldn't export anything.
They couldn't export. And with this grain deal, they were able to get, some of their grain exports out. But obviously, before the war, everything was going out easily. There was no
there are no hindrances, no restrictions.
But now, obviously, with the war, we've seen, it's expected data that, exports would actually reduce significantly for Ukraine. So the data is just telling us, what we already know, basically.
Just confirming it.
Just confirming it. And but we're seeing, those exports, move out at this time, and hopefully Russia
will keep to the deal, will renew it, and allow it to go on. Now, Egypt is appealing for an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. And somebody I spoke to early this morning said, that's not because they want Ukraine and Russia to stop fighting. They want to get their precious wheat.
Yeah, when the giants fight, obviously the grass will suffer.
And Egypt is the grass in this case.
In this case, yeah, because they need, all of that wheat and all those edible oils coming from, Ukraine and Russia. And obviously, this deal, is helping countries like Egypt, the MENA nations actually get the much needed, wheat and grains, at this time. Obviously, any disruption right now, we're talking about, hunger, global hunger at this point. So we're seeing Egypt, make appeals to end the war, as soon as possible, even though they've also cited that, keeping to the pledges, is harder, with Russia weaponizing, gas. We've seen the way, Germany had to resort to dirtier options, like
return to them.
Return to them. So at the end of the day, a lot is hanging on this war. For this COP27, to get the benefits, make sure the pledges and, the funds are made available. We need the war to actually end, and to make sure we still keep getting all those, much needed grains
out and at reasonable cost.
Reasonable cost.
How are the markets looking? It's midweek.
Yeah, midweek, the markets are not looking bad. You know, the U.S. markets closed, you know, in the green yesterday, but the futures this morning not looking, you know, so good. We know the midterm elections, you know, all investors are watching out, you know, for the midterm elections at this time in the U.S. because some analysts have said there's always some kind of, you know, surge in equities after the midterm election. So it remains to be seen if that actually happens. But these are peculiar times with inflation and with central bankers raising rates. So we might see a different turn of events talking about the markets. But we saw the crypto market this morning hammered in a big way. We saw Bitcoin, it lost the 20K levels, about $19,800. We saw Ethereum also lose the 1,500 level. So not looking so good, you know, the crypto market, because we're seeing two giants, you know, in the crypto space, centralized exchanges, Binance and FTX exchange. Right. They're having some kind of battle at this point. Binance is saying FTX exchange is not solvent. FTX is saying we are solvent. So all of that, you know,
it's been factored into the overall cost.
Obviously, investors are selling off at this point. So it remains to be seen how that actually plays out. But it's going to be volatile going forward for the crypto space. Then yesterday, we had the first in-person trading at the NGX.
At the NGX in Nigeria.
Here in Nigeria, and the market actually closed flat. You know, surprisingly. So it's 0.00, but in the green though.
That doesn't often happen.
It doesn't often happen. So it's quite interesting that it happened, you know, on the first, you know, trading session. So it remains to be seen how the market actually closes today. But we still have that, you know, downward trend.
Still going, and it's been persistent for quite a while.
Persistent. So we need to see the headwinds actually try to taper at some point. So the central bankers, so the central bankers stop, you know, hiking rates, and the equities market can get some gains.
Can get some gains. Thanks, Laddie. Of course, Laddie will be back with some more of this analysis right after this on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated. As always, thank you, Laddie.
Thank you.
Ukraine's International Legion has named the U.S. citizen killed during combat in eastern Ukraine. In a statement sent, the Legion said, "Our brother in arms, Timothy Griffin, has taken part in the counter-offensive on the Eastern Front with his unit and was killed in action while conducting operations. The unit came under attack." Mr. Griffin is believed to be the 6th American who has died in Ukraine since the Russian invasion in February. Let's talk now to Major General Augustine Agundu, military strategist, a retired military officer. He's in our Abuja studio. General, thank you for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Laddie. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
I want to start off from the battlefront, and I want to find out, you being an officer yourself, in the case of some of the cities, the Russians have evacuated the cities in preparation for combat. The Ukrainians have continued to emphasize that they do not intend to harm the civilians. But the Russians say that that cannot be trusted, and therefore they are evacuating. Apart from a few who refuse to go, some of the cities that expect to be part of a Ukrainian offensive have been emptied. Is there really a difference between when you try to take an objective or a military post where there are no civilians from when it has civilians and then, you know, the situation is significantly different?
Yes, in such conflicts, we have to be able to distinguish between civilian targets and what ordinarily should be military targets. And we do not know what they are out to achieve by this current situation that they have placed on the citizens and on the civilians. Of course, we know that civilians have suffered massively in the past conflicts, in the past engagements and all that. So it's better advised that civilians in harm's way should go to safety, just like when you evacuate, if there are flood alarms and all whatnot, because the conflict is still, I don't know what stage it is. Is it still at the infancy stage, or maybe the real war has not yet started? So there's a massive buildup. Since the Russian authorities are taking this particular step, then the world should be much more concerned.
There is, because you alluded to it, even though not directly, there's a question of the weaponry involved in all of this. Many of us know armies to be based mainly on infantry, artillery, and then air support when they're going after targets, when they're on the offensive. But in this particular case, we have seen the use particularly of unmanned aerial vehicles, particularly drones, what most people know as drones, armed drones. And these have both attacked and returned, and then there are others that they call kamikaze drones, which have destroyed themselves upon impact while also destroying the objective. This have caused a great deal of damage. In the case of Russia, it is alleged that a lot of this is coming from Iran. The Ukrainians also have their own drones, and they are preparing to use them even more. There's a company that has now just set up in Ukraine itself. How much of an impact do you think this will have, especially as it seems as if the conventional air battles that usually precede the ground offensives are not taking place?
Yes, in the first instance, the battle space is gradually changing. Now the SY boots on the ground is no longer fashionable, if you say, because opposing sides always try to reduce their own casualties. So if it is possible to do the even the electronic warfares and using drones or manned vehicles to achieve their aim, that is right. And of course, you have also seen advanced weapon systems that are being employed in the theater. These are dangerous trends, and we should not be talking about this now. I believe very sincerely that the war is taking a dimension that has never been seen before. Alliances have been built on such a high magnitude, and again, I will also repeat that we are tending towards what happened in the Second World War, Allied forces, Axis forces, and all those and the likes. So it's better we should start talking more on how to end this conflict, as in quotes, as the Ukrainian president put it, the madness, before it gets out of control and out of hand entirely. The buildup is massive. The weapon systems being used are new designs and new weapon systems that have never been tested before on battlefield. The effect is going to be devastating.
You have commanded troops actually on the ground, General, and my next question is going to be based on that. How do you keep the war, as you said, we don't know whether to still say the war is in its infancy or it has not actually started. But then we're approaching the start of the 10th month of this war. And one would expect that troops, the ground troops, the infantry troops on both sides will need morale boosting. Never mind whatever is going on with the propaganda war. The commanders have a task to keep the troops motivated. What does a leader in this kind of situation, first from a Russian perspective, where they seem to be on the back foot, but they're still attacking. And then you have the Ukrainians on the offensive, but they are still defending. Many of their cities are without power, they're without water, and the Russians are still destroying a great deal of infrastructure. What do you think the commanders on both sides are saying to their troops to keep them going? What do you tell troops in that kind of situation, especially with the harsh weather condition that is expected to descend on the battlefield?
Now, on both sides, what you see there is the patriotic zeal to defend the territorial integrity of their country, whatever that means to them. And that is why it is necessary for us to build that particular instinct in ourselves. So do you believe in what you are doing? So from both sides, they believe the Ukrainians are defending their homeland, and the Russians have a stake in what they are doing. So both of them believe in their actions. So that is what actually keeps the troops moving. You see, and this is where training, just like talking about the harsh weather condition that is coming on is nothing, because this is where the training and retraining is very, very essential to withstand all sorts of weather. And do not forget, the military is trained to fight in under all weather conditions. And most essentially also, you see that the Russians have this belief in what they are doing, and the Ukrainians also have the belief to defend their, and also because of the level of support and all. So these things, they ginger them to continue to fight. So it's I do hope that some positive, the power of rational reasoning should be in place now. Otherwise, we are going in for a long drawn war in the coming months. And do not forget, like you said, the winter will set in sooner than later. This November, I think the winter in Ukraine is between November and March. It's going to be at its highest peak in January. So they must have prepared themselves for this long drawn war, their engagement that they are on. So it is very essential that caution and a lot of restraint for all well-meaning people should set in before the harsh weather comes in its full force.
Before I let you go, General, I must ask you this: when this conflict started, I remember that when I spoke to you, I think within the very week that it started, you said a lot of lives are going to be lost, a lot of infrastructure is going to be destroyed, but they're still going to find that they have to come and sit down and talk, regardless of whatever both sides are saying at the start. At that time, I took it to mean that, of course, your own experience with peace operations within Nigeria and outside Nigeria was what was leading you to that conclusion. But almost 10 months down the line, nobody is winning. But it's a grinding war. Even the allies, we are seeing some signs of fatigue on the allies, you know, particularly those who are supporting Ukraine as it affects their domestic politics. But is there any real hope for peace at this point?
Very good question, Ladi. You see, what is at play today is, I have always said it, is some element of personal ego and as well as destructive national pride, neither of which is needed in constructive diplomatic engagement. So now we are closing every opportunity towards peace, unless this power of rational reasoning, which is at risk, is reversed. And perhaps we might tell the world they should borrow from African Union. Look at what happened between the Ethiopian forces and the Tigray and all that. And today there is a peace deal that has been signed, a truce has been arrived at. And do not forget, at the height of even the Tigray crisis, a lot of engagement on both sides have been on by the African Union. Somebody has been speaking to somebody within on both sides. But here, in the case of where we are with Russia and Ukraine, nobody is speaking to any person tending towards peace. So it is a very destructive tendency that we are there. And let us look at even the worst of it all, the massive humanitarian consequences of our belligerent actions. The humanitarian catastrophe that we emanate from this is the psyche of the people have been destroyed. It might take years for them to recover. Some might not even come out of it in years to come. And some might die with it. Look at the level of infrastructural destruction. Look at what's going to happen with the cleanup exercises. How many years is it going to do cleanup before you talk about rebuilding? A lot of things are at stake here. I think it is better that the war comes to an end. And of course, I agree with, I tend to agree with the position of Egyptian president as regards this in this climate conference, which is talking about is stopping. The world is gradually going into self-destruction if care is not taken.
Very grim news there, General. But let me thank you, Major General Augustine Agundu, for your time and for your interesting perspectives, as always. It's been a pleasure to host you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ladi. I appreciate you.
And when we come back, how one camper is preparing for Kiev's harsh winter. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. A branch of Ukraine's Orthodox Church has announced that it will allow its churches to celebrate Christmas on December the 25th rather than January the 7th, as is traditional in Orthodox congregations. The announcement by the Kiev-headquartered Orthodox Church of Ukraine widens the rift between the Russian Orthodox Church and other Orthodox believers that has deepened due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine said in part in a statement that taking into account the numerous requests and taking into account the discussion that has been going on for many years in the church and in society, predicting in particular due to the circumstances of the war, the escalation of calendar disputes in the public space, the believers will be allowed to have their Christmas celebrations on December the 25th this year. And the sports news, Ukraine's Shakhtar Donetsk may not be able to keep Brazil winger Tete on their books much longer, as some European clubs want the player. Tete is currently on loan at Lyon, although our parent club Donetsk remains open to a deal in January for the player, who is valued at 25 million euros. His contract ends in December 2023, meaning the Ukrainian side will begin to cash in during January to get a fair value. Reports from England indicate that West Ham United are trying to sign the winger in January, despite his deal at Lyon. And seasoned traveler and camping enthusiast Olena Bastian is putting her equipment to use in her Kiev apartment to prepare for a potentially harsh winter ahead. In our final story on the program this morning, Ms. Bastian has traveled by motorcycle to 117 countries across the world. The power grid and water infrastructure in Kiev has been targeted by Russian airstrikes in recent weeks, and energy providers have resorted to planned power cuts to avoid overloads and to allow infrastructure to be repaired. Kiev residents face the possibility of widespread power, water, and heating outages. Ms. Bastian plans to use her travel equipment to endure the difficult conditions. She has stocked up on head torches, camping gas canisters, tents, and sleeping bags, as well as a portable fridge, a solar panel for charging phones and other devices, and a range of snacks from Vietnam, Germany, and the United States. Her son, who has served as a medic in the Ukrainian military since 2014, also gave her some of the equipment. She and her husband are traveling back to Europe from Argentinian capital Buenos Aires in February as they observed Russia's military buildup on the country's borders, but they changed their flight plans to Madrid for one of the last flights to Kiev via Istanbul. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiri Doloale. We're back tomorrow morning at 9. And there are updates of the stories throughout the day, but particularly in the world today at 5. But for now, you have yourselves a good day ahead. Good morning.